Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Breaking Down BEC, the $9 billion security threat you can't ignore. I'm Kristen Zurovich and I'll be your moderator for the webcast today. I'm happy to be joined by two leading cybersecurity experts, Roger Sells and Jack Koziel. Roger is the VP of Information Security at DarkMatter, which is an international defense and cybersecurity consultancy and implementation firm headquartered in the UAE. He's responsible for overseeing all aspects of the company's IT infrastructure, driving forward security policy, and ensuring IT risks are well managed. A Belgian national, Roger has over 18 years of IT security experience, having held the highest security clearance from a number of governmental and non-governmental agencies throughout Europe. And just this month, I'm happy to see that Roger was named a 2018 CISO 100 winner in the prestigious Middle East Security Awards. Congratulations to you, Roger, and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Kristen, and good morning to everyone.
And also with me is Jack Koziel. Jack is the CEO and founder of InfoSec Institute. With years of private vulnerability and exploitation development experience, he has trained members of the U.S. intelligence community, military, and federal law agencies. His extensive experience also includes delivering security awareness and training for Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, HP, and Citibank. Jack's the lead author of the Shell Coder's Handbook, Discovering and Exploiting Security Holes. He also wrote Intrusion Detection with Snort, a best-selling security resource. Jack has appeared in USA Today, CNN, MSNBC, First Business, and other media outlets for his expert opinions on information security. Welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Kristen. Welcome, everybody.
So before we get started with today's discussion, I thought it might actually be helpful to spend a few short minutes talking about exactly what BEC or business email compromise is, and really how these type of attacks work. So BEC is a cybersecurity attack that pairs both sophisticated social engineering and phishing emails together. The sole intent of BEC is really to defraud an organization of money. And BEC scams occur when an attacker impersonates a company's stakeholder, usually an executive or a vendor within your organization, and then tricks an employee either into transferring money to a fraudulent account or sharing confidential information that can then be used to financially impact the organization in another way. And over the past couple years, BEC scams have grown significantly in both frequency and impact. And it's really not just the large companies that are susceptible. What we're seeing right now is these attacks are being unleashed on businesses of all sizes. In fact, from 2013 to 2016, the FBI reports that BEC scams cost businesses $5.3 billion. And what we see is that from just 2015 to 2016 alone, the financial impact of these BEC attacks grew more than 2,000%. What's probably even worse is that these losses will continue to escalate. Cloud security vendor Trend Micro actually predicts that the losses by the end of this year will exceed $9 billion. So how exactly do BEC attacks work? As you see here, there are three primary phases. First of all, hackers will start by infiltrating the ranks, and they do this through phishing attacks in which they'll harvest employee account credentials. Some of the common methods to do this could be, DocuSign login pages or maybe other websites that your business uses frequently. But once acquired, the attackers will use these credentials to research your employees and gain access to your accounts and mail servers. So just something to be aware of, if your company uses single-factor authentication, the likelihood of a BEC attack increases significantly. After that, attackers will spend hours and hundreds, thousands of hours social engineering their targets, and typically these would be your top executives. They will research your processes, your vendors, even current and past email exchanges. And if your wire transfer process, that is, involves supporting documents, attackers will find the required forms, they'll study your processes, and even set up email filtering rules to hide their reconnaissance activity within your organization. If the attacker plans to impersonate a vendor and issue fraudulent invoices, they will usually typo squat your vendor's domains, and that way they can craft legitimate looking email addresses and websites. And then lastly, once the attacker knows your processes, your employees, maybe your vendors very well, they'll actually leverage all this stolen persona information to start sending emails to staff. And this might be junior staff that they're aware of, and demand wire transfers or sensitive information. The requests they send are typically urgent, and they include all the necessary paperwork that they've gained through their reconnaissance. But transfers typically will go to accounts that are held by shell corporations in foreign countries. And this means that recovering these funds can often be difficult and in several cases impossible. So if we take a look here, these are the most common BEC attacks that we see. In fake invoice schemes, an attacker will impersonate a vendor, they'll issue a fraudulent invoice, and then they'll provide payment details that are altered to match an attacker-controlled account. CEO fraud is just what it sounds like. The attacker will pretend to be a company executive demanding an urgent wire transfer. Account compromise is similar to a fake invoice scheme, but in this case, the attacker actually hacks an employee email account, and then they'll request payment to the company's vendor. Again, payment information will be altered to match that attacker-controlled account that they have. In attorney impersonations, attackers will pose as a lawyer or maybe some other trusted official who handles confidential information for your organization. And they may request things like W-2 information or other sensitive data from staff that can be used to further a BEC attack. And lastly, there's data theft, in which the attacker will target HR or accounting employees, and they'll use that as an opportunity to steal sensitive data like tax information, again, with the intent of using that in a future BEC attack. So that kind of gives a foundation for BEC, business email compromise, that we'll be talking about today. At this point, I'd really like to start opening up the discussion between our two guests, Roger and Jack. Our goal here is to get their expert insights on what makes BEC attacks so successful. And more importantly, and really the reason you're all tuned into this webinar, is to get some practical advice on how to protect your own organizations. During this time, I also encourage you to share your questions for Roger and Jack as well. So simply use that question pane that you see on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of these as possible today. So Jack, maybe we could start with you. Why don't we talk a little bit about what makes BEC attacks so successful in the first place?
Sure, thanks, Kristen. BEC hits really at the heart of the intersection between people and technology. In an ever-evolving world, these BEC attacks that social engineer or take advantage of people's trust or lack of understanding of technology systems makes them extremely successful. If you were to walk up to the accounts payable person in your organization and say, transfer $100,000 to this account, they would not fall for that. They would, you couldn't just walk up to someone and tell them to do that. But if you can impersonate someone by disguising yourself as them through an email, or disguising yourself as a CEO through an email, then these attacks become plausible, and you can see why there's such a great impact. The other reason that they're so successful is that in a lot of cases they are in conjunction with other attack vectors. So in some cases, people that are orchestrating these attacks will compromise the accounts of an executive or someone within the organization and actually send the email from their account. So you're dealing with two different attack vectors. It's a BEC attack, but it has occurred because they've compromised the account of someone within the organization, and those can be much harder to detect and a lot more dangerous. So you can see how these attacks have had a big impact.
I guess, Roger, based on your experience and the work you do both as VP of Information Security at your own organization and as a consultant, what do you see that makes these attacks so successful?
Thank you, Kristen. Well, to expand on Jack's point, it's not a technological attack, and the attacker can be fairly confident that in a lot of cases it's going to fly under the radar undetected. And these are two real key elements to an attacker, because they can leverage them very successfully and keep on doing that until they hit a target that is going to give them the operational outcome that they desire. It's exploiting a number of weaknesses in human psychology, and that's always been proven in the past even to be successful when people would actually phone you up and try to steal the information. But now you have an automated layer around it to be able to target more victims at the same time.
Sure. Now, your role is actually quite unique. As I mentioned, not only are you in charge of information security at DarkMatter, but your firm, your company, DarkMatter, is advising clients on how to protect their organizations and data as well. I'm interested if you can share with us some of the real-world security challenges that you're facing these days and what kind of measures you're taking to address these.
That's a very good question. One of the things internally that we set out to do is to define the right measures across people, process, and technology, and apply these controls in equal parts. It wouldn't really be efficient to say, okay, only the next quarter will focus on getting more technology in, because you then would ignore a couple of controls that can be implemented at the process level, or you wouldn't be gaining any efficiency and effectiveness from security awareness training of your staff. So you have to keep balancing your security program to cover all these aspects. And that's essentially also what our teams advise our clients on, defining that overarching security program, seeing what the maturity level of the program is with the client, and then tailoring a program to address these specific issues across people, technology, and process.
My apologies, Rogers. I was on mute. I was just,
Okay.
that happens sometimes. I was just wondering if you could share some specific examples within your organization where security awareness education was one of those mechanisms that you use to battle these kind
Of
of
course.
issues.
Of course. So when we designed the security program, we built it so that the message would be reinforced. So when new staff is onboarded, we have a security induction training. In that training, we share effective, actual examples of attacks that we have seen that were targeting certain members of staff. If we have people of a certain job role and we've seen attacks tailored to that job role, we will highlight that as well. So we try to tailor it a bit to the audience. We reinforce this security awareness campaign with posters and I would say quarterly messaging by myself on new threats and how to deal with them. Specifically tailored to BEC, we have a wider anti-phishing program where we explain the psychology of the attacker and how they will try to induce a response from staff, and the security measures that we have in place, like visually marking emails, tagging them as spam, filtering them to a separate folder, So we educate people on what kind of controls we offer to the organization and what they can expect. But then, most importantly, we tell them, look, if you get a request that in any way seems abnormal, especially if a sense of urgency is being created, it is all right for you to question that, to reach out to the alleged counterparty via internal means and ask a confirmation. Did that message come from you? So we established that culture. Later on, we will then start an internal phishing campaign. And after a while, we also perform a more targeted red team exercise. In the phishing campaign, for instance, the goal is not to trick employees 100% into clicking on a link or in sharing information. And that's what I see goes wrong in a lot of these campaigns. The planning phase and how you reach the objective are key. I saw that even with my teams. They were at some point really trying to figure out for this user population, what is the most effective message that's going to yield the highest click rate. And I had to adjust that to say, well, that's not the scope of the exercise. We're also not going to relax our security controls to make our campaign more effective, because we've been training people on the effectiveness of certain controls, and we want them to feel that this is a piece of education that we're offering, and that we're not out there to get them, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And actually, I think that's a really good point. And I've heard you talk about this a little bit as well, Jack, in the philosophy behind employee education. And I guess based on your experience and what you've seen with a variety of different clients, I guess, can you speak to that philosophy maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not have an adversarial relationship with your user base as a as you know an information security professional. Security awareness programs, they're not about tricking people, they're about educating people. We're about building a positive culture around security champions that identify attacks, that do the right thing, and practice good security hygiene. So these are real important points about having an effective security awareness program that retains buy-in throughout the entire organization.
And as I'm thinking about educating the entire workforce, I mean, there are different levels of individuals and how well-tuned or well-honed their security aptitude might be. I think of those individuals in the organization, we tend mostly to think of maybe IT folks or the more technically savvy or maybe developer or engineer types who may almost seem beyond needing awareness education just by their technical nature. I guess, Roger, within your organization, because you also have a fairly technical staff, how do you actually go about educating or implementing the change that you need in your organization when you have so many individuals seemingly who are quite technically adept?
That's a very good question. We had to come up with a number of scenarios for these people, because obviously, if we send them an email saying, maybe even a more advanced example where we could send a fake reset your Outlook password type of email, that wouldn't work with these people. And as you rightly said, we even have a couple of departments where we have, for instance, penetration testers. We have security researchers. They're even more savvy than the IT folks. What we did there is we tried to play into messaging that we knew was coming out from HR or other initiatives, and see how they would respond to really non-technical stimulants. So I know at some point one of our team members was inviting people to obviously fake lunches with our CEO to reward their performance and to discuss their evolution in the company. And surprisingly enough, that passed through a lot of people's defenses. Even worse, we had one gentleman who that particular day didn't bring in any lunch. So I think the lesson that we can draw from that is if you teach a man to fish, he will eat for his entire life. If you fish him for free lunch, he'll starve.
I love that. Too funny. I know one of the things that I also hear when it comes to BEC is there's the education portion of this. You're making sure that you equip your employees, your staff with the skills so that they can detect and help protect not only their own personal data, but the data of the company. But then there's also kind of a policy or a procedural side of BEC, because BEC by its nature is social engineering at its finest. I'm wondering if either of you can talk to any internal processes or policies that organizations should maybe take notice of or look at updating, reviewing, adapting because of what we're seeing on the BEC front right now. And maybe Roger, we'll start with you.
Obviously, when you look at these policies, you have to start with high risk policies, and especially when it comes to financial fraud or possibility for fraud, analyzing all of these sub processes that could lead to funds being diverted to a different account. For instance, there might be a standalone process that is just updating the details of a vendor, but later on is processed by a different team to make a payment or even make a recurring payment so that at a later stage, some funds would be released. So you have to go back to your business stakeholders and really ask the questions on, okay, what are the controls that you have in place to catch that? Would you catch that? And try and simulate that, while at the same point raising the awareness within, for instance, such functions that handle payments, handle invoice updates, or vendor or partner detail updates on the risks that they will face, and showing them examples.
And I guess, do either of you have some specific examples of whether it's financial or other processes within an organization that you've seen organizations change what their practice is?
Well, I think you're seeing organizations of all sizes implement much more strict international wire transfer policies, and that is in response to the most common type of BEC attack, which is an attack where a wire is sent internationally, as we've talked to today. So of all shapes and sizes, everyone, from a small manufacturing plant of a couple hundred people, all the way up to the largest organizations, you're really seeing a lot of movement around that. And to add to that point is policies are great, and it's great when it's kind of backward looking, that these are the threats that have come up in 2017, 2018 are around wire transfers and international wire transfers. But where's the ball going, and where are we headed with this? And how can we implement policies that are going to help us prevent the 2019 attacks? So I think we're seeing a shift of a lot of BEC attacks moving from the traditional wire transfer scam into other types of scams that are actually more damaging. Intellectual property theft, credential theft, large-scale database attacks. That are, if a large Fortune 500 organization, if someone steals $500,000 from them, it's bad, and it's not good, and no company wants to lose that amount of money. But it's not going to impair their business to the point where they can't operate. But you have a large scale attack where someone steals intellectual property or steals the entire database of all their customers. Those are those are existential events that could potentially end the business. So so looking forward, looking with policies, I think is really important as we go into 2019.
Very
But
good.
then, if I may add to that, Jack, it's coupling that to the right technology controls. Because as you said, okay, somebody, for instance, trying to steal the customer database, that's where you could introduce a DLP or pair it with a number of other controls that can help thwart the actual effect. You would be late in the kill chain, but that should be a measure that that you've thought of already and have implemented.
And maybe that's something we can talk about right now is you have employee education, making people cyber aware. You have policies, procedures that you're reviewing and updating as appropriate. And then there are all these technical controls that you can put in place. And maybe let's talk a little bit about the phishing kill chain. And from the point that things are coming into the organization to the point that potentially information might be leaving your company. Can we talk a little bit about some of the technologies that organizations should think about having in place across that kill chain? And maybe why don't we start with the front end of the kill chain, and how do you gate things from coming in?
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about the kill chain, specifically the phishing attacks, the first key element is filtering, and how good is your filtering? You want to try to identify a lot of these phishing attacks, and the traditional phishing attack, spear phishing attack, where you're redirecting someone to a link, or you're trying to compromise them through an attachment, an executable, or a document that has a 0-day exploit in it. Those type of things are more easily filterable than normal business communication, which is what a BEC attack really is. It's just normal business communication, and they're much harder to filter. And I think as we move forward and we see AI and machine learning being applied more rigorously and to gateway filtering devices, I think we're gonna get better at blocking BEC. The other technology thing, and a real simple way to detect stuff, and there's not a lot of easy wins in security, is putting banners that identify emails that come from external email addresses. A simple banner that's always auto attached to the subject that shows that this is an external email. And a lot of times is going to identify a lot of the typo squatting, a lot of the really clever domain registration that's taking advantage of Unicode domains that are now possible. That real simple thing can reduce BEC attacks by quite a bit. And I pulled a little bit of data on our system, Security IQ, since we've launched our BEC feature a couple months ago. We've seen about 8 million phishing attempts that went out, and organizations that flag emails from external email addresses have a much lower, 60% lower compromise rate on BEC emails. So that's an easy win that you can implement, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's a mail server configuration, but yeah, that's early in the attack chain. I don't know if there's more we want to talk about that.
Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add, Roger?
Actually, I think that is the key measure to put in place against BEC. And one of the things that we noticed internally that was very effective is not just prefacing the label to say warning or this is a spam message, but by default, we now just classify everything with a header to say this is likely a phishing attempt. And that just triggers that awareness immediately in people, because okay, spam message, people are likely to start thinking, no, it's misclassified, I was expecting this, it's from my vendor, it's from my partner. But if you tell them, well, it's phishing, it's a different expectation. And we've had some very positive returns from staff saying, actually, you made me think differently before opening that email, and not just blame the system that it was inadequately labeled.
That's good. I guess, do we want to move maybe further down the kill chain then? What next steps should people be looking at?
Sure. I think, as we touched upon credential theft, it's quite important to have a central identity and access management solution with single sign-on and tying it into a two-factor or multi-factor authentication, so that if a user's credentials would be stolen, would have been volunteered up, they're actually not usable on the estate, and that can also reduce some frustration with staff members, because now you have to rotate passwords less. You can make them a little bit less complex, and it just helps make it a bit more seamless from a user point of view.
Yeah, that's a key critical piece of your infrastructure is your IAM and also how you manage that. Another piece in the kill chain is once a phishing email gets through your defenses, what do your users do? And as Roger mentioned, awareness training is really important, but on a technical point of view, is an easy way for them to alert the organization that they have received a phishing email. So technology that is integrated in whatever email client, so they can push a button and report that email directly into their SOC or whatever incident response capabilities your organization has, so that when these attacks do happen, the people that can take action on it, the security team knows about it. And if your user population can do that quickly and easily with the push of a button, and you reward them through your awareness program or through recognition, that's going to build a lot of cyber resiliency within your workforce if you have that piece of technology in place.
I fully agree with you, Jack. And that's also something that you can then push as a lessons learned back into the security awareness program and highlight to staff, well, somebody reported this email, we filtered it. In some cases, if it is a very targeted email to a number of key people, we've gone as far as saying, okay, we will actually filter for this message across all mailboxes and preventively delete the mail so that nobody else can actually interact with it without actually opening or viewing content, obviously. So maintaining data privacy. But then we share that back with the users or the employees, and they see how they can become an integral part of this anti-phishing and anti-fraud defense program, and that seems to resonate with them quite a lot.
And I guess, if we keep moving down that chain again, there are BEC attacks which will have some success. Someone will click, they will be in the process of gathering whatever information is requested. I guess, what do you do at the end of that chain to prevent information, whether it's private information, secure information, from actually leaving the organization?
Yeah, there's a variety of technology solutions out there around data loss prevention. Some are easier to configure than others, and some organizations can implement these. But some sort of monitoring of what's leaving the organization and an automated response to try to block certain flagged bits of data from going out is necessary. And additionally, on top of that, is configuring people in sensitive roles to not be able to auto forward emails out from their mailbox. And the reason for this is if you're mailbox is compromised and someone is actively using your mailbox for a BEC phishing attack, a big piece of that exploit, if you want to call it an exploit, is setting up auto forward emails to forward these responses back out. And if they don't have that capability, that's going to force them to routinely or automatedly, repeatedly check that account to get information. And the auto filtering also is used in a lot of these cases to prevent information from getting to the person's inbox that was compromised. Think of a wire transfer confirmation or an alert that you shouldn't do this wire. That would be filtered if that inbox was compromised. So if it's possible, just disabling auto forwarding along with DLP can stop some of the can be your last line of defense.
Sure. And actually, Adam, who joined us today, and thanks for tuning in, Adam, had a question related to DLP. He's wondering, does attacker-controlled encryption bypass DLP?
In some cases, it does, but unknown encryption detected on your network that is going out. There's an encrypted data stream going out, and you don't know where it is, what it is, and where it's going. That in of itself is something that should be alerted on, and could be a sign of something bad. So pretty hard to detect attacker-controlled encryption from just normal web traffic, but that in of itself is something that could be suspicious. So, but definitely DLP can't decrypt everything. So,
Jack, if I may, here I'd like to share a different perspective. I don't disagree that DLP today is a viable solution. But I think in the future we'll be moving more to DRM technologies, and some of these are really maturing only right now, where in essence you're encrypting the file or the data, structured and unstructured data, and establishing a key server and ACLs to these keys for your organization, for partners, and even after transmitting the data, you can revoke access to the file, where it seems more frictionless than setting up a DLP, and where I see maybe less abilities for an attacker to counter that system.
Yeah, I personally don't have experience with those technology solutions, but it sounds really promising, and it just seems like a good idea to have control over your data, regardless of where it is, in the cloud, on someone's desktop, with your partner. That is a holy grail in a lot of cases. So if we're getting to that, that's wonderful. And if you can make one of those work for your organization, definitely you should.
Very good. We have another question here from Jonathan, and he's asking you, if we look back, he's interested in either or both of your thoughts on how we actually got to this point with BEC attacks, and why is the bar to BEC attacks so low today?
Well, I think if you look at traditional phishing attacks, you've got to get through defenses, and you've got to sneak a URL through defenses, that are going to check that URL for malicious content, or you have to send an attachment. And we've really gotten better as an industry. A lot of phishing attacks are those URLs are detected. A lot of content that is malicious is blocked. Even document-based content is deconstructed. There's a lot of tools out there nowadays to deconstruct documents, put them back together, and remove anything that doesn't conform to, let's say the PDF standard. That could remove just any sort of unknown attack into it. But Business email compromise, there's none of that. And it's easy. If you think about how hard it really is very hard to create a zero-day attack for a document or for a file or in a browser. You can see that the bug bounties on these things are in excess of many millions of dollars. These tools aren't available to everybody, but spoofing an email, sending an email, pretending to be somebody else, just being a jerk, that, you know, almost anybody can do that. So the bar is very low to orchestrate these attacks. So that's why we're seeing a lot more of these. And if you think about where that's going, you know, in security, attackers are always ahead of us in terms of innovation on attack types. You can see that that's kind of where we've gone as an industry, and also the other part to it, just to add, not to be too long-winded, but the return on investment is great. If you're gonna steal hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars from an organization, and all you have to do is get 3 or 4 people together and start spoofing emails, that's a pretty good return on investment, especially if you're outside of the purview of any real law enforcement.
Roger, did you have anything else to add?
Well, maybe just to emphasize what Jack said, that entry bar has gotten a lot lower, and probably indeed because as organizations, because as a cybersecurity community, we've helped organizations improve their security posture. They're patching faster, they're detecting and responding to incidents a lot faster than a couple of years ago. Security controls offered by modern operating systems have also raised the bar, as Jack mentioned. It's a natural evolution to come back to the user. And I think in the next years, likely we'll see more multi-stage and multi-channel type of attacks, where initially the attacker builds up some rapport with the victim, exchanges a couple of very benign emails, and then only at a later stage really tries to push the victim to open a link, open an attachment. Maybe there will be some emphasis added through a calling campaign, following up and really adding more pressure on people, and that will be the next difficult stage of that attack to detect.
That's actually a really interesting segue. I just got a question in from Marty, and Marty's wondering, where is this all going? He's interested in what you guys think the threat landscape might look like in 2 years. So I guess this is your opportunity to look into your crystal balls and share where you do think this might go. I guess, Jack, do you have any other ideas playing off of what Roger just said?
Yeah, sure. More complex attacks, attacks that use multiple vectors. You see phone, SMS, email. I think you'll also see social media play a part in attack vectors as the defenses within corporations and organizations becomes better and better. The attack vector may just switch to targeting people's personal communication streams through Snapchat, email, their personal email. They may move to a softer target in terms of that. As far as the nature of the attack, 2017, 2018, it's all about the international wire transfer. That's what you hear over and over again. And as those get locked down, and as people have better processes and technology to combat that, people will move to other areas within the organization that are less of a direct win in terms of a monetary compromise. So I see the landscape shifting towards that in the next year or two.
Very good. Thanks. I have a question here from Rob. First of all, he says, thanks for the webinar. He's also wondering if you can speak to some of the technical aspects of locking down links in email, which can launch background processes to engage other services. And as an example, he gives voice over IP or collaboration applications, which with access to make background telephone calls. Any thoughts on that?
I'll take it, Kristen, if that's fine for you.
Absolutely.
There are two aspects, and that's, well, detecting when a second process is being launched, and you can implement a couple of controls around that. We're even seeing that in emails through DD Auto, where documents are being opened automatically, or commands passed to other programs. Now, specifically in a VoIP setting, a control that you would typically try to put up is if a session time becomes too long, or if a call duration hits a certain limit, that you would reset that call, and then if certain calls incur a different cost, that there would be a fixed barrier or parameter set to drop the call as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice there, Roger. I would even say if you're repeatedly attacked through URLs that launch a VoIP call, detonate all those URLs. It's not that big of an inconvenience to have to switch into your app and make the call versus it being launched from a URL. So you may have to fight some internal political battles to do that, but I mean, if that's a problem, just shut it off. So, and then try, intelligently filtering, as mentioned before, emails from external sources. If you have an external source and it contains a URL that launches a VoIP call, detonate those URLs, shut them off. So that people can't just click right into that. They have to go into the app and make a decision. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to go do that, and that's kind of where it comes back to security awareness and how you're training your people. But give them an opportunity to pause their their workflow, their mental workflow on clicking on a VoIP call and going into it. So.
Good. And then Rob actually just had a follow-up question in the same vein. He's wondering about business email lockdown on mobile devices and if you have any advice or recommendations there, either of you.
Yeah, mobile is harder. With desktop email clients, we have 20-year history of being able to augment and improve the client. So with Outlook, or if it's Gmail, you have a real robust, flexible architecture for vendors to provide additional tooling to help you. But on the mobile space, it's good and it's bad. It's more locked down. So you're less able to influence how the mobile client behaves, and you're more reliant on message transport into that mobile client. So in those cases, you're just going to have to get more creative with how that message transport happens and when it happens, and what gateways are in place. Yeah, I think that's all I had to say. I don't know, Roger, if you had any other experience on mobile email client lockdown.
I fully agree with you, Jack. It is definitely a more difficult landscape to address. And some of the advice that you typically hand out in security awareness training doesn't even really work on a mobile. You know how you educate people to always be vigilant of which email domain they've received an email from. Actually, on a mobile client, you wouldn't see the full email domain sometimes.
Right.
And that's what we've seen. People just will set it up with a name of, for instance, one of our executives, a random Gmail address, send an email, because when it pops up on the mobile, all people see is the name of the executive. And we've really had to think about a couple of filtering strategies to say, well, if the name matches with one of our executives or other key people in the organization, but it doesn't match with their approved internal email address, we'll still filter it into the spam filter and give a warning that this may be a phishing attempt. But it's still hard to make that more visual on the mobile platform.
Yeah, it's especially a challenge just with character length and touch screens. It's very hard to scroll to the side just to see if they've got a long subdomain. So yeah, big challenge, and definitely an area that I'm sure providers of mobile email clients are looking to address. But
just one thought to add, though, in these samples, you typically would have already locked down certain content, and people, well, at least in this organization, don't tend to have access to their most sensitive documents and data on the mobile. So I guess the risk is more of being lured into malicious websites, submitting their credentials, and then there are the other measures that we discussed on the webinar so far, the two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, and a number of these others like identity and access management that come into play again.
Very good. We do have a couple other questions that unfortunately we are not going to have time for today, but we'll circle back with those of you folks that have submitted those questions after the webinar and provide some thoughts there. I think maybe I'll do a quick recap just of some of the high-level things that we learned today. So Roger, you and Jack both highlighted kind of three key areas that I understood where our viewers should really focus their BEC mitigation efforts. One is assessing and implementing the necessary technologies throughout the phishing kill chain, whether that be filtering capabilities to catch BEC attacks upon arrival. I know you talked about that, Jack. We talked about identity and access management. You had some good ideas there, Roger. And we also touched on DLP and DRM as a future way to mitigate those types of attacks. The other thing was, really taking a look at and updating any of those internal policies and procedures, particularly those related to financial transactions or sharing of private information, both internally and externally. And then lastly, the third area was to develop a strategy to educate your employees on the threat of business email compromise. How do they detect a BEC scam? What should they do if they receive something suspicious? Things like that. And I think one of the key things that we certainly learn on the education front is if you don't already have a security awareness training program in place, now is really the time to start developing and thinking about that. And here at InfoSec Institute, we've developed Security IQ, which Jack had mentioned previously. With more than 1,200 awareness training modules and phishing simulation resources, Security IQ really helps you train your employees and build that proactive culture of cyber awareness that we've been talking about. In addition to an interactive BEC training module that's included in the platform, it also includes more than 20 BEC phishing templates that you can use. So you can actually simulate requests for things like wire transfers or fake invoices, or maybe it's W-2 information or VPN password resets. The beauty of Security IQ is then it actually takes it one step further by then providing you simulation reply tracking and sensitive data detection. And what I mean by that is you can actually see who responds to a mock BEC attack and what information they may have shared via that simulation. If you're interested, we'd be happy to provide a demo of Security IQ and its BEC Defense Suite. Simply get in touch with us at info@infosecinstitute.com. Otherwise, as a thank you for everyone who attended today's webinar, we'll provide you with a Security IQ phishing diagnostic test, so you can actually assess how vulnerable your organization is today to phishing, whether that's BEC attempts or just phishing in general. The test will include 3 phishing simulations that you can deploy for up to 150,000 learners across your organization. It will give you customization of any of the phishing templates you want to use during the test. It has phishing indicators, so little pop-ups that will show your learners what they may have missed in a mock email, and complete diagnostic reports at the end of your campaign, which will include the phish open rates, the click rates, and so forth. But with that, I'd like to thank today's guests, Roger and Jack. Thanks so much for an engaging discussion about business email compromise, a really hot topic today. I appreciate both of you for being online with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kristen. Great.
And thanks to all of you for joining us online. I hope that we will see you again in an upcoming webinar. Until then, have a great day.